In a dimly lit room, the faint light slipped through the frame of an old wooden window, where an aging soldier sat quietly. Draped across his shoulders was a faded uniform, worn thin by the years, carrying with it the scars and stains of war. In his hands, he held an old leather wallet, and inside was only a single photograph, yellowed with time, the image of a little girl smiling innocently. His eyes blurred, unclear whether from the dust of passing years or from tears he could no longer hold back. For decades, he had lived with a gnawing guilt, guarding a secret he had never revealed. He once believed that silence was the best way to protect the people he loved. Yet that very silence had turned him into a stranger within his own family. Outside, life moved on, but for him, time seemed frozen at the moment when his daughter looked at him with coldness and hate. Among the flickering memories of the battlefield, gun smoke, the cries of fallen comrades, the unsent letters, everything rushed back into his mind. The man who once stood firm under the rain of bombs and bullets now collapsed under the weight of his own memories. People often praise returning soldiers as heroes. But in this story, a man who had sacrificed everything was forced to live as someone forgotten, despised. The question echoed, not only in his heart but also in the minds of those who listened. What could drive a man who dedicated his entire life to his country to become a shadow within his own home? Why did he choose to hide the truth? And what price did he pay for that choice? This story is not just a soldier's recollection of war. It is also the journey of a father, a man confronting his deepest regrets. And in the deepest corners of his heart, there remained one single desire: to see his daughter forgive him. Before it was too late, the man had once been a soldier. He wore the green uniform when he was still very young, leaving behind his poor hometown and simple dreams to step into the battlefield. During those years, he endured every hardship: hunger, cold, sleepless nights filled with tension, and the constant presence of death waiting after every attack. He watched his comrades fall right before his eyes, sometimes in just a matter of seconds. The pain was unbearable, yet he kept standing, because in his heart there was always one belief: to fight for his country, and above all, to protect his small family back home. But when the war finally ended, he returned with a frail body, a soul covered in scars, and eyes that had seen too much loss. He longed for a welcoming embrace, for the smile of his wife, for the innocent gaze of his little girl. Yet harsh reality struck him down. The wife he once loved no longer waited. Through those endless years of absence, she had been forced to carry the burden alone, enduring hardship until her love slowly faded. By the time he returned, in her eyes, he was no longer the strong husband she once admired, but a distant figure, a heavy weight upon a life already too difficult. His daughter, the little girl in the photo he always carried, had grown up. But in her memory, her father was nothing more than someone who abandoned her. She did not understand why he had been absent during the most important years of her childhood. She did not understand why her mother cried silently at night, or why people whispered outside that he was a coward, a man who ran away when his comrades needed him most. To her, her father was not a hero, but a traitor. Returning to his hometown, he did not just face the coldness of his family. He also endured the contemptuous stares of his neighbors, of the entire community where he had once grown up. They whispered behind his back, pointed fingers at him, called him by cruel names: coward, deserter, traitor. Each word struck like a knife, cutting deeper into a heart already bleeding. He lived out his days in silence. Perhaps, for many, silence is the easiest choice when there is no strength left to explain. But within that silence, he swallowed a truth he never revealed. He knew well that he was not a traitor. He had chosen to sacrifice a part of his life, to carry a stain upon his name, all to protect something greater. But how could he explain that? How could he tell everything, when the very people he wanted to protect were the same ones condemning him? On countless nights, he sat alone in an empty room, listening to the ticking of the clock, recalling the moment his daughter hid behind her mother, looking at him not with affection but with distance. That gaze haunted him far more than any nightmare from the battlefield. For a soldier, bombs and bullets had never brought him down, but that look from his child pushed him into the depths of despair. Deep inside, he still held on to hope that one day the truth would be revealed. That his daughter would understand why he made the choices he did. That his family would know he was not the coward they believed him to be. But for years, that hope was like a fragile flame, always on the verge of fading into the darkness. And so he remained, a soldier once trained to face enemies head-on, now left with only himself, battling the endless silence and his own regret. In the darkest days of his life, when his faith in family, in his village, and even in himself had nearly run dry, the old soldier suddenly received news that seemed insignificant at first. An old comrade, someone who had once shared with him those years of life and death on the battlefield, had just passed away, leaving him an unusual inheritance, a small house, once used as their unit's shelter. When the news spread, relatives and neighbors scoffed. They said, "That is nothing more than a pile of broken bricks. Who would ever want to live in a place like that?" His ex-wife was even colder. "You can go wherever you want. Just do not drag us along anymore." Even his daughter showed no interest, because in her mind, her father had already lost all meaning. But to him, that old house was not just four crumbling walls. It was sacred ground of memory, where the laughter and songs of his comrades once echoed, where sweat and blood were spilled, where the footsteps of an entire generation were carved deep into the earth. He knew well that inside that useless little house, something was waiting for him to uncover. The day he arrived, the abandoned home stood before him as a witness to time. The rotting wooden door creaked loudly as he pushed it open. Inside, dust coated everything. Cobwebs stretched across the corners. The musty smell choked him. Yet in that very moment, he felt his heart stir. Here, he was no longer pierced by contemptuous stares, no longer wounded by whispers behind his back. Here, it was just him and his memories. He began to clean, piece by piece. Old objects slowly emerged from beneath the thick dust. A dented steel helmet, a notebook yellowed by time, scraps of fabric still bearing the faded marks of military insignia. Each item he touched made his heart ache, as if he were reaching back into the years he had lost. On some nights, he sat for hours in the empty house, listening to the wind howl through the cracks in the door, recalling the loud laughter and careless songs of comrades long gone. Now, everything was only an echo. Even though the house was broken down, he decided to stay. He had nothing left to lose. But at least this place gave him a sense of belonging. He patched the leaking roof, nailed the loose boards, set up a simple bed. Slowly, the house of ruins began to breathe again. Villagers passing by pointed fingers. That old man must be insane, locking himself inside a pile of junk. But he did not reply. He had grown used to scorn, and no longer had the strength to argue. Sometimes he wondered, was this an escape? Was he running away from his family, from the rejection of society? Or was this the beginning of a new journey, a journey to rediscover himself? During his cleaning, he stumbled upon strange things. A cabinet drawer locked tight without a key. A wooden box buried deep beneath the floor. A scrap of paper with hastily scribbled words left unfinished. Each discovery stirred his curiosity further. He felt strongly that this house was not just a worthless inheritance. Somewhere here, a truth had been buried with time. A truth that could change everything. And in that moment, a faint spark of hope flickered in his mind. The hope that this forgotten place might give him one last chance. A chance to reclaim his honor. To prove to his daughter and to the world that he was never a coward. And perhaps, a chance to live again. To find meaning in a life that had long seemed broken. In the first days inside the old house, the aging soldier spent all his time cleaning and repairing. Each time he brushed the dust from an object, it felt as if he were touching a thick layer of memories, filled with something he had never fully seen before. Yet the more he cleaned, the more he realized things were not quite normal. Inside a decayed wooden cabinet, he discovered a small notebook. Its cover was yellowed, its corners gnawed by termites. But the handwriting inside remained clear. It was not his diary, but that of the comrade who had left him the house. The brief entries, some scribbled hastily as though written in the dead of night, described fierce battles and quiet sacrifices. Yet certain lines had been crossed out, entire sections torn away. One unfinished page read, "He took the blame for everything, just so he could be safe. But will anyone ever know the truth?" And then it stopped. as though the writer had never been able to finish. His heart clenched as he read. He knew instantly who he was. It was himself, the man who had chosen silence to protect his comrades. The one who carried the shame of cowardice in their place. But why had his comrade torn out the crucial pages? Was there something the whole unit had conspired to bury? In the days that followed, he searched further. Beneath the bed, he found a wooden box locked tight. The lock was rusted, but his calloused hands, once familiar with cold steel, broke it open easily. Inside, along with a few trinkets, lay a letter never sent. On the envelope, in trembling handwriting, was his name, along with a short note. If you are reading this, I am probably gone. He sat for hours, hands shaking as he unfolded the letter. His comrade described the final battle, the place where the truth had been buried. The letter confirmed it. He had taken all responsibility for a mistake that was not his. To preserve the honor of the unit, and to protect certain names of great importance. Yet the letter ended vaguely. I fear the truth will never be accepted. They needed someone to carry the blame. And you agreed to be that man. He closed the letter, his heart heavy. For years, he had known why he remained silent. But for the first time, he realized there had been someone else who understood his sacrifice. Why, then, had this letter never been revealed? Who had hidden it here? And for what purpose? The deeper he dug, the more clues appeared. In a loose corner of the wall, he pulled out an old map marked with secret locations around their former base. Some symbols made no sense, but he recognized the red slashes. They matched the posts where his unit had once stood guard. Stranger still, scrawled across the map were the words, "Keep silent. The truth will bury us all." A shiver ran through him. Who had written this? Another comrade? Or someone higher up? And why did it suggest that the truth should never be revealed? At night, the house grew eerily quiet as he sat by the oil lamp, reading and rereading these fragments. They were not enough to form a complete picture, but they were enough to ignite a fire inside him. The truth could not remain buried forever. Perhaps everyone out there, his ex-wife, his daughter, the neighbors, had already turned their backs on him. But if he could piece together the last fragments, if he could bring the truth into the light, he would not only clear his own name, but also show his daughter that he had never abandoned his family. Never been the coward they believed. Yet a voice inside warned him, the road ahead would not be easy. These secrets had not been left behind by chance. Someone wanted them buried forever. And if he kept digging, he might uncover a truth that could make powerful people tremble. In that moment, fear and hope intertwined within him. Fear, because he knew he might face rejection once again, or even danger. But hope as well, because for the first time in years, he saw a path before him, a reason to keep going. He closed the notebook, tucked the letter into his jacket, and sat silently in the dark. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks like the voices of the past calling his name. The old soldier understood that his search for truth had only just begun, and from this moment on, his life would never be the same again. News of the old soldier moving back into the abandoned house spread across the village like fuel for gossip. People whispered that he had sunk too deep into despair and chosen to crawl into that place to escape their contempt. Some laughed cruelly, saying he was clinging to illusions of the past. When reality was clear, he was a coward, a man who had abandoned both comrades and family. These poisonous words dripped into the ears of his daughter like steady rain. Subtle but piercing. One afternoon, he returned to the village to buy some supplies. The moment he stepped through the market gate, whispers rose all around him. People no longer bothered to hide them. One man pointed directly at him and spat out, "Shameless." He came back alive, but left the whole village with disgrace. Another voice followed. If he had not run that day, his comrades would not have died in vain. That broken down house is proof, just a place for him to gnaw at his guilt. He remained silent, his shoulders trembled slightly, but his gaze stayed steady. He knew that arguing would only deepen their contempt, but as he turned away, he caught sight of his daughter standing at the end of the road. Her eyes burned with fury. That look was no longer distant, it was a sentence. She whispered, loud enough for him to hear, "I wish you had never come back." The words struck like lightning. In that instant, he felt his knees buckle. Bombs and bullets had never brought him down. Yet his own child's voice shattered his soul. Rumors spread faster. A few of his former officers, now powerful men in the region, began to revive the old story. In public meetings, they openly condemned him, calling him the disgrace of the army. Each accusation was another nail hammered into the coffin of a truth long buried. But what tormented him more was the arrival of strangers around the old house. At first, they were just vague shadows lurking outside. Then came anonymous notes slipped under the door. Stop digging into the past if you want to live in peace. Some nights, he clearly heard footsteps circling the house, followed by whispers fading into the dark. He understood then that he was brushing against a truth someone desperately wanted to stay hidden. The rumors and accusations were not just ordinary contempt. They were part of a larger conspiracy to silence him forever, to deny him any chance of clearing his name. The villagers eventually organized a meeting to clarify his honor. In reality, it was a hidden trial, meant to condemn him. Presiding over it was none other than a former commanding officer, now a man of great influence in the region. In front of everyone, the officer declared, "We must preserve the honor of those who sacrificed. A deserter like him is not worthy of being called a soldier." Scattered applause broke out, swelling into a wave of agreement. The old soldier sat in silence, listening to the accusations, with no chance to defend himself. He knew that whatever he said, no one would believe him. They had lived with lies for too long. The truth now seemed distant and unrecognizable. At that moment, he realized he stood at a crossroads. One path was to stay silent, accept the verdict of the majority, and live the rest of his days in isolation. The other was to face everything, embrace the danger, and push forward until the truth was revealed. Looking at his daughter in the crowd, her eyes filled with anger, but with a faint glimmer of hope deep inside, he knew he could not give up. The old soldier rose, his hands clenched tight. His voice was deep but unwavering. "You want the truth? I will give you the truth. And when it comes to light, do not expect peace anymore." The air froze for a beat, then erupted in noise. The crowd mocked, sneered, warned him he was courting disaster. But even in the storm, he felt something clear within himself. He had entered the climax of his journey. There was no turning back. After the village meeting filled with judgment, the old soldier returned to the abandoned house. That night, he sat beside the oil lamp, his heart weighed down. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks as if to remind him that the past had never truly gone to sleep. On the table lay the clues he had gathered, the notebook, the letter, the map, scattered about. But to his eyes they were slowly forming a larger picture. He knew he was still missing one final piece. And perhaps, that piece was hidden somewhere inside this very house. He began to search more carefully. Beneath the floor tiles, certain spots looked odd. Bricks that had been relaid more recently, though they had aged with time. With hardened hands and a crowbar, he pried them up. Beneath lay a metal box. The lock was rusted, but inside it remained intact, a thick stack of military files, carefully wrapped in oilcloth. His heart pounded as he opened it. Inside were classified records, documenting the entire course of the final battle he and his unit had fought. Reading through the pages, the truth struck him. It had not been his fault. It was a grave mistake by higher command that had caused the deaths of dozens of soldiers. But instead of admitting it, the officers had chosen a scapegoat, and that scapegoat was him. Among the documents were recordings, the voice of his former commander. Cold and dismissive, "He will take the blame. He is just a lowly soldier. What does he matter, as long as the unit's honor remains intact? The dead are dead, after all." The words made his chest tighten. For all the years he had carried shame, he realized he had only ever been a pawn in someone else's game. But within the files lay something even more unexpected, a letter addressed to his daughter. Never sent. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakably his, written long ago on a battlefield night. In it, he explained that he had accepted blame to protect his unit, and to shield his family from powerful men who could have destroyed them. He wrote, "I was never a coward. I chose silence. One day, if you read these words, I want you to know that I never abandoned you." Tears streamed down his face as he read. He could not recall why the letter had been left there. perhaps hidden alongside the files and then forgotten. But now that it had resurfaced, it stood as undeniable proof of both his love and his sacrifice for his daughter. That very night, his daughter unexpectedly arrived. She wanted to confront him after all she had heard at the village meeting. At first, her eyes still burned with resentment, but when he placed the files and the unsent letter into her trembling hands, she slowly unfolded them and began to read. Each line tore down the wall that had separated father and child. Tears fell onto her cheeks as she sobbed. "Father, why did you endure this all alone? Why did you not tell me sooner?" The old soldier laid his calloused hand gently on her shoulder. "I was afraid the truth would take you away from me. I thought silence would protect you. But that silence, it already made me lose you." In that moment, her eyes changed. The hatred faded, replaced by compassion. She embraced him tightly, as if trying to make up for all the years lost. And just as they found each other in this fragile moment, heavy footsteps thundered outside. The door burst open. Strangers in sharp uniforms stepped in. They were enforcers of the same power that had buried the truth long ago. A familiar voice rang out, chilling and firm. The very commander from years past. "Old man, you should not have dug into the past. Hand over the documents, or do not blame us for what happens next." The air grew tense, like the edge of a blade. The old soldier knew this moment had gone beyond personal honor. This was his final battle, not fought with bullets, but with truth itself. In that moment, facing the very men who had once commanded him, the small room became a new battlefield. There were no bullets flying, but the eyes, the words, and even the silence cut just as sharply as any blade. The old soldier sat upright, no longer hiding. Before him lay the files, the evidence strong enough to expose the chain of lies that had buried the truth for decades. The former commander growled, "Give it to me, and keep quiet. You have kept silent for decades. A few more years will not make any difference." But this time, the old soldier was no longer the man who accepted retreat. He stood, his voice deep and unwavering. "No, I have stayed silent for too long. That silence cost me everything, my family, my honor, even my daughter's trust. Today, I have nothing left to lose, except one final chance, to speak the truth." His daughter gripped his hand tightly, her eyes blazing. She stared at the men before her. "You deceived an entire generation. You turned my father into the scapegoat. But now, we will not let you steal the truth any longer." Shouts erupted, bodies pushed, but in the end, the evidence was too overwhelming. His daughter rushed out to call upon the villagers. Soon, voices gathered outside. Neighbors who had believed the lies for years now saw with their own eyes the files, the letter, the recordings. They whispered, then argued among themselves, and slowly their gazes shifted. The once powerful commander, who thought his influence would shield him, now stood pale-faced before the weight of truth in the eyes of the entire community. The arrogance vanished, leaving only panic and powerless anger. For the first time in many years, the old soldier no longer bowed his head. He lifted his face to the crowd, his voice steady though not loud. "I never ran. I never betrayed my comrades. I chose silence because I believed sacrificing myself was the only way to protect those I loved. But the price I paid was losing everything. If you still wish to condemn me, then do so, but at least, the truth is no longer hidden." The air grew heavy with silence. Then, from the crowd, a frail voice spoke. An old comrade stepped forward, limping, aged, but with eyes still burning. His voice trembled, yet carried weight. "He speaks the truth. Back then, we let him take it all. If it had not been for him, I and many others would not be standing here today. We owe him our lives." The words spread like fire through the night. Murmurs turned into cries of agreement. His daughter broke into tears, throwing her arms around him. And in that embrace, the old soldier finally felt the one thing he had longed for all these years: forgiveness. His honor was restored, not only by the papers and recordings, but by the trust of his daughter and the changing eyes of his community. The man once despised, once living silently in the shadows, was now seen for who he truly was: a soldier, a father, and a man who had sacrificed quietly for them all. That night, the old house lay silent after the storm. The old soldier sat on the front step, the faint glow of the oil lamp casting his shadow long across the cracked wall. Beside him, his daughter rested her head on his shoulder. Her eyes still red but softened. Her resentment eased. Neither spoke much. They simply sat together, letting the silence speak for them. In his fading eyes, he saw again the little girl he once knew, smiling innocently in the old photograph. For years, he had feared that the truth would shatter their bond. But in the end, it was the truth that tied them back together. His voice trembled, yet carried warmth. I do not regret fighting. I do not regret sacrificing. What I regret is being silent for so long. If only I had spoken sooner. Perhaps we would not have lost so much time. His daughter clasped his rough hand and replied, I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to truly be here with me. We still have time, do we not, Father? He nodded gently, smiling. This time, the smile was not weighed down by sorrow, but serene, as if he had finally found where he belonged. Outside, the first light of dawn began to rise, chasing away the darkness. One chapter had closed, making way for a new beginning, late, but still full of hope. A deep, steady narration echoed, as though speaking to the audience. There are truths which, when revealed, can cause pain, tearing apart what we once believed. Yet those very truths, once understood, hold the power to heal wounds that seemed impossible to mend. The question is, do we choose silence to preserve an illusion? Or do we face the truth to reclaim our real worth? In the final frame, the old soldier and his daughter walked out of the house together, their shadows stretching long across the village road bathed in morning sunlight. A new chapter of life opened, not marked by victories in war, but by forgiveness. That night, the old house lay silent after the storm. The old soldier sat on the front step, the faint glow of the oil lamp casting his shadow long across the cracked wall. Beside him, his daughter rested her head on his shoulder. Her eyes still red but softened. Her resentment eased. Neither spoke much. They simply sat together, letting the silence speak for them. In his fading eyes, he saw again the little girl he once knew, smiling innocently in the old photograph. For years, he had feared that the truth would shatter their bond. But in the end, it was the truth that tied them back together. His voice trembled, yet carried warmth. I do not regret fighting. I do not regret sacrificing. What I regret is being silent for so long. If only I had spoken sooner. Perhaps we would not have lost so much time. His daughter clasped his rough hand and replied, I never needed you to be perfect. I just needed you to truly be here with me. We still have time, do we not, Father? He nodded gently, smiling. This time, the smile was not weighed down by sorrow, but serene, as if he had finally found where he belonged. Outside, the first light of dawn began to rise, chasing away the darkness. One chapter had closed, making way for a new beginning, late, but still full of hope. A deep, steady narration echoed, as though speaking to the audience. There are truths which, when revealed, can cause pain, tearing apart what we once believed. Yet those very truths, once understood, hold the power to heal wounds that seemed impossible to mend. The question is, do we choose silence to preserve an illusion? Or do we face the truth to reclaim our real worth? In the final frame, the old soldier and his daughter walked out of the house together, their shadows stretching long across the village road bathed in morning sunlight. A new chapter of life opened, not marked by victories in war, but by forgiveness.